Good evening, everyone. So I want to start with a koan from our collection, The Whole World is a Single Flower. This is a traditional Chinese koan. Many of you will recognize it. Everyday mind is the true way. Joju asked Zen Master Nam Chuan, what is the true way? Everyday mind is the true way. Then should I try to keep it or not? If you try to keep it, you are already mistaken. But if I do not try, how can I understand the true way? Nam Chuan said, the true way is not dependent on understanding or not understanding. Understanding is illusion. Not understanding is blankness. If you completely attain the true way of not thinking, it is like space, clear and void. So, why do you make right and wrong? Upon hearing this, Joju suddenly got enlightenment. If I had my druthers, especially just for this talk, I would have liked this koan to be titled, Everyday Life is the True Way. So I'm going to try to take off a little bit from this everyday mind to everyday life. But I think where I want to get to here is talking about practice in everyday life, the situations, the way we approach things, and how thinking, feeling, mood, desire, craving, all color our view so we get lost. So, everyday mind in Zen is a pure, clear, natural mind, not tainted by likes, dislikes, good, bad, right, and wrong. So, the koan, Joju asks his Zen master Nam Chuan, what is the true way? He says, everyday mind is the true way. We can close it right there. The true way is just what's happening now. If we keep a natural, everyday mind, then how do we approach what's happening right now? Just today, I don't know about you, I imagine very similar to me, you faced about 1,000 different situations, 1,000 things that you had to make a choice, things that you had to react to, things you had to work with in just the course of your everyday life. And Nam Chuan is telling Joju, just meet the moment. Keep a simple, clear mind. Of course, that's easy to say, hard to do. But in some ways, all the instructions can come back to be clear. Be aware of your reactivity. Let go of your reactivity and deal with what's right in front of you. So this simple teaching, everyday mind is the true way, it kind of stumps Joju. A lot of us know Zen Master Nam Chuan from the Zen Master who killed the cat. Joju was his main disciple, and when Nam Chuan died, Joju was about 60 years old, and everybody assumed that Joju would become the Zen Master at the temple. And Joju said, I'm 60 years old, but I'm not ready yet. So Joju went on a 20-year pilgrimage, visiting teachers, finding out more deeply about himself. And then when he was 80 years old, he felt the time was right, and he started to teach. And as the myth would have it, he happened to live 40 years more. So he didn't die till he was 120, if you can believe that. And Joju is a very important part of the record of Zen in this golden era where these koans come from. The Japanese call him Joshu, A lot of the times when you read Zen literature, you get the Japanese names, but it's the same person. So this very simple teaching, everyday mind is the true way, Joju didn't get it. He says, well, should I keep it or not keep it? What should I do with it? Nam Chuan says, if you try to keep it, you were already mistaken. It's a wonderful teaching for us all right there. If we try too hard, we can often miss the mark. I remember times doing Kunlun practice with Zen Master Bon Soeng, and there would be some answer that I would give, and he'd say, 120%. Too much. Too much. So if we try too hard, we go over too much. I've made this point before. When my nephew was in college, he was part of a Buddhist group, and he quit the group. And I said, well, how come you quit? He said, because everybody in the group seems to be living their life like they're walking on eggshells. I interpret this as trying too hard. You can try to be too good a Buddhist, and in the process, you lose a more natural, simple, everyday mind. You start to try to be perfect, to do everything right. And with the time of the Buddha in India, there was also the rise of the Jain Religion. And for the people in the Jain Religion, the Buddhists were a little too callous. Because in the Jain Religion, you can't kill anything. Do no harm is taken to a very extreme point. So much so in the modern day world, and I'm not making a comment whether this is good or bad. Some people like this, some people don't. But in India, you'll see Jains wearing masks so that small bugs don't get into their mouths, so they won't kill the bugs. Is that too much or not? I don't know. But I think I'm just trying to give an example of extreme behaviors that may separate us so much from the everyday world that we become a little too pure, too focused on purity and getting things right, that we may miss the reality of the situation that we're faced with. We take a precept. The first precept we take is do not kill. By the end of the party, after the precept ceremony, we've already broken the precept. Even most Zen centers, we have a vegetarian cuisine, but you've killed a lettuce plant, carrots, onions. You walk on the street, in the Jains and some Zen masters have these whisks, and you sweep in front of you so you don't step on any living creature. It can take a long time to get from point A to point B. Maybe that's okay. You get to choose. But Zen mind and Buddhism in general is the middle way. Not too tight, not too loose. And that's a good way of describing everyday mind. Not too tight, not too loose. And if you think of your own life, and I know when I think of mine, it's often when I'm too tight or too loose that situations fall apart. Speech is a good example. It's very easy to be too loose with speech. I can think back on situations in my life where I really should have kept my mouth shut. But I was kind of giddy, maybe I was a bit intoxicated by the moment. I'm not talking about substances, I'm just talking about the camaraderie of a group. And then I start talking about something that when I look back on it, I really should have kept my mouth shut. I shouldn't have been saying that. Then gossip is a good example. You get into things and with people and you start talking about other people. And the next thing you know, you're saying bad things about your friends. You're pointing out everybody else's faults. So it's very easy to see it on the loose side, that when we get too loose, we can lose our way. But I think from our perspective, if you get too tight, we could say you're holding your opinion too strongly. You also get lost. So we need to be supple enough to be in the moment and really discern what's going on. And for me, that gets us to the heart of practice. And even our formal sitting and chanting practice, it's about finding that middle point where we can let go enough to not taint everything with our tight mind or loose mind, our desire mind, our anger mind, our needy mind, that those kinds of minds color things so much that when we interact with the world, we're skewed. And in that skewing, we create suffering. So we often talk about coming back to the center point, returning to zero. So everyday mind is simple, clear, and not attached. So again, Joju said, but if I do not try, how can I understand the true way? Nam Chuan says, the true way is not dependent on understanding or not understanding. You could say the true way is not dependent on what I like or what I don't like. The true way is not dependent on our subjective analysis of it. We get so lost in our subjective analysis, our commentary, our spin on things, that we miss what's actually right in front of us. Understanding is illusion. We think we know something when we think we understand it. But Nam Chuan cuts the feet right out of that. Understanding is illusion. So then you might say the opposite of understanding is not understanding. So maybe that's what I should go toward. But then he says, not understanding is blankness. If you completely attain the true way of not thinking, it is like space, clear and void. So why do you make right and wrong? So I said I wanted to connect this up with the very actuality of our everyday life. Sometimes people get frustrated with Buddha's teaching because in Buddhism we start with the first noble truth of life is suffering. People can take that as a very dismal way of looking at the world. Because in truth, even with the suffering that there is, there's great joy, there's love, there's fun, there's appreciation, there's gratitude, there's the beauty of connecting with others. There's so much amazingly wonderful things that are available to us. But we might wonder, well, why does the Buddha start with life is suffering? I think if we're honest, so much of what's wonderful and beautiful and incredible about our existence is a bit out of reach. We're trying for it. We want this possibility. And of course, we have it moment to moment, different moments in our lives. But we're often finding it a little bit out of reach. So Buddhist practice, when we say life is suffering, we're really saying suffering is apparent in our lives because we get skewed and lost in our likes and dislikes and desires. You've heard me say this a million times. You know, it's true I'm a psychotherapist, and also a Zen teacher. So I'm working with people who are coming for help, admitting the difficulties in their lives. But the difficulties that one presents in psychotherapy aren't that different, or in the interview room, aren't that different than what everybody struggles with. It may be a matter of degree, but myself included, probably most of the people in this room listening to this talk at one point or another have done psychotherapy themselves, because life is challenging. And sometimes we lose our way, we get lost. You know, I was just running through different themes that I work with, and it often is about some kind of, to say it in an extreme way, to call it a trauma, but some kinds of difficulties, usually that they're faced really young in life, but also it might be older in life. Relationships, that's a big one. Any relationship, friendship, intimate partnership, marriage, parent-child, you name it, there are difficulties. There are conflicting needs. There are the struggles with my own needs. There is the intensity of not getting what I want, being frustrated because the other person should be giving me what I want, and they're not. The difficulty of really being able to see another person as being an individual who has their own way of perceiving the world. The difficulties, I mean, there are so many. I'm trying to remember, I went through it in my mind. People facing illness and death. People struggling with poverty. People struggling with kind of the institutionalized barriers that exist in our society. The lack of rights for particular classes of individuals. I had these in mind before I started. They're hard to keep. Feeling like the world is overwhelming and I can't quite get my voice expressed. The feeling that everything that I do gets criticized by somebody. I can't quite find my footing. I'm sure you all could add to this list. So those things skew our consciousness, and then we overcompensate for them generally. And when something happens in our lives, we overreact. Somebody says something we don't particularly feel good about, we bite their head off. Things like that. In our practice, if we can sit and observe our lives and find that point of letting go, we can train to meet the moment more clearly, more openly, and more consciously. We often talk about mind. Everyday mind is the path. We don't talk so much about mood and feelings. But I would imagine that most of us in this room some days wake up in a crappy mood. And you might not even know why. Maybe you're a little more tired. Maybe you had bad dreams. Maybe the biochemistry in your body is shifting. Maybe you're afraid about something that's coming up and you're not even aware of what you're afraid of. But you wake up in this mood. And then this mood colors how we see and respond to the world. We have to deal with that. Everyday life is the path. Working with the situations that we find ourselves, the experiences that we are feeling inside, is our practice. And we need a deep awareness of what it is that we're experiencing. And that's where our formal practice really has a lot to do with our everyday life practice. We train ourselves to, as Zen Master Bon Soeng would have said, to understand our karma, to be able to perceive our mood. I know I'm thinking in my relationship with my wife, what she'll often tell me is, if you're feeling something, if you're irritated, tell me. Because then at least I know where you're coming from. If you don't tell me, then I'm a little bit off balance. I don't know what's going on. And sometimes I'll say to her, well, that's a nice idea, but I have to know. And I've spent years investigating and wondering. But I have to know if I'm going to be able to help the situation. So I use my everyday life to start giving me cues. If I'm reacting in a way that's unusual for me, like if I'm irritated and I'm pushing things away that I usually wouldn't, that tells me something. So I have to watch. That awareness and that skill of observing and watching that we cultivate in our formal practice, we need to bring to the everyday moments of our life. Because if I'm not aware of it, I'm going to act it out. If I'm aware of it, I have a chance to do something differently. When the Buddha talked about feelings, he made a very simple point. Generally, we feel positively, negatively, or neutrally. Neutral, that's a tough one. That's a nice one, but that's probably the most rare. But those feelings arise so quickly, and most often outside of our awareness, that it takes attention and presence to notice them as they arise. What I notice in my own experience is that sometimes thinking follows feeling, and other times feeling follows thinking. There are times that, let's say, I remember something that I forgot to do, and then I get that, and that anxiety feeling might arise. And suddenly I'm in that state of agitation. Some people like it. For most of us, that's a negative feeling, and we want to get rid of it. But often, if we try to get rid of it, in many ways it just gets worse. But if we can use our practice to be aware of it, to become, when it's happening, we may not like it, but in that moment, what's it really like? Discover the experience of agitation. Investigate it. You know, oftentimes we say in sitting meditation, especially on long retreats, that working with pain, say, feel it, experience it, investigate it, wonder about it. Pain is actually not what we think it is. Viscerally, somatically, experience it. And that's a good practice point. Experience the feeling that we're having. Rather than trying to push it away or deny it, be with it. If we can lessen that positive and negative, or maybe we could simply say the likes and dislikes, then we can work with it. But our aversion to something makes it that much more difficult to actually work on it. Even in a funny way, the opposite of aversion would be desire, our wanting, our liking. That also can skew our minds. A lot of the things we use to soothe ourselves are not healthy. To be able to experience the cravings for things gives us a possible chance to do something differently. But if we're not working on a really deep level with awareness of our experience, we just go after things without knowing why. And sometimes with food, we'll have something in our mouths before we realize that we've put it in there. Because we fall asleep all the time. We use this phrase in Buddhist practice, wake up. We walk around like we're asleep. And we follow our desires, our aversions, and we're not aware of what's happening. So in a very simple way, we orient our practice towards awareness of what our actual experience is. And as we always talk about making our center stronger, if we can build our center, build our stability, build our ability and our power, really, to be present and not act. If we can sit with the agitation, we don't have to do anything about it. But if we can't hold it, we're a slave to it, and we're reacting and, I would say, stirring the pot and making the soup worse and worse. The best thing to do, you can see it in our culture. There's always an overreaction that's happening. We work ourselves into a frenzy, and then we miss the simple things that are right in front of us. I'm not talking about not getting excited about things. But if we do get excited, or when we get excited, be aware that we're excited. Keep the presence of mind and attention to be aware of what's happening right now. To be aware of what we're aware of. To be present, alive, and not reactive. We lose ourselves in our reactivity. We find ourselves in that middle spot. Not too tight, not too loose.